The air at Forward Operating Base Archer was not air. It was a physical substance, a concoction of fine-grained silica, vaporized diesel, and the lingering ghost of cordite that clung to the back of the throat like a bad memory. The sun was a malevolent god, hammering the corrugated steel roofs of the firing ranges with a white-hot fist, making the very atmosphere shimmer and warp. Inside the enclosed space of Range 7, the advanced ballistics and ordnance proving ground, the only respite from the heat was the industrial roar of overworked climate control units, a sound that vibrated up through the soles of a soldier's boots and settled deep in the bones. It was a place of noise and violence, a cathedral built to the god of the precisely delivered projectile, and its high priest was Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a man carved from the very bedrock of naval special warfare. His face was a roadmap of hard landings and harder fights, his eyes the color of a stormy sea, and his voice was a tool he wielded with the same casual lethality as the custom-built rifle that was perpetually slung across his chest. He moved through the world as if he owned it, and on Range 7, he did. He was the senior enlisted advisor for the visiting SEAL team, a cadre of hand-picked operators tasked with evaluating a new generation of battlefield technology. His men orbited him, a constellation of muscle and bravado, their laughter loud and their confidence absolute. They were predators in their natural habitat, and the stale, recycled air of the range was thick with their testosterone and unshakable self-assurance. In the far corner of the cavernous room, away from the controlled chaos of the firing line, a figure stood in stark contrast to the scene. It was a woman. She was not large, nor was she clad in the high-speed, multi-camouflaged armor of the operators. She wore simple, sterile gray fatigues, the kind favored by contractors and technical specialists, devoid of rank or unit patches. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun, and her face was unremarkable, a study in placid neutrality. She held no weapon. She spoke to no one. She simply stood, her hands clasped behind her back, and watched. Her stillness was an anomaly in this place of constant motion, a pocket of silence in a symphony of concussion. To Marcus Thorne, she was an irritation, a piece of grit in the finely tuned machine of his world. He had noticed her an hour ago, a gray ghost that had slipped through the heavy blast doors without a word. He had assumed she was with the civilian engineering contingent, some data entry clerk sent to log their performance metrics. But she did not carry a tablet or a clipboard. She just watched, her gaze sweeping over the proceedings with an unnerving, analytical calm. It was the rifle that finally drew his full attention. It rested on a small, portable maintenance cradle beside her, a long, skeletal weapon that looked more like a piece of alien technology than a tool of war. Its chassis was a matte, non-reflective black, its barrel shrouded in a complex array of heat sinks and what looked like magnetic coils. It was utterly foreign, and its presence on his range, near this unassuming woman, was an insult to the established order of things. Thorne swaggered over, his team trailing in his wake like sharks drawn to a disturbance in the water. They formed a loose, intimidating semicircle around her, their bulk and gear seeming to suck the very light from that corner of the room. The air grew heavy, charged with a predatory energy. The woman did not acknowledge their approach. Her eyes remained fixed downrange, where one of Thorne's men was demonstrating a breaching charge. She seemed to exist on a different plane of reality, one where 5 of the most dangerous men on the planet surrounding her was an event of no particular significance. This infuriating lack of reaction was a spark on the dry tinder of Thorne's ego. "You lost, ma'am?" he began, his voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that was far more menacing than a shout. He deliberately used the civilian honorific, a verbal jab meant to establish her as an outsider, a non-combatant trespassing in a warrior's space. The woman's head turned, a slow, deliberate motion. Her eyes, a pale and startlingly clear shade of blue, met his. There was no fear in them, no deference. There was nothing at all, just a cool, dispassionate assessment. It was like being looked at by a machine. "I don't believe so, Senior Chief," she said. Her voice was quiet, her tone perfectly level, devoid of any inflection. She knew his rank. The observation registered in the back of Thorne's mind, but he dismissed it. Everyone on base knew who he was. "This is a closed range," Thorne continued, stepping closer, invading her personal space. The smell of his sweat and the sun-baked dust on his gear filled the air between them. "DevGru evaluation only. I think you took a wrong turn at the mess hall." His men snickered, a low chorus of masculine approval. The jackals were enjoying the lion's display of dominance. "My schedule indicates I'm precisely where I need to be," she replied, her gaze unwavering. She did not raise her voice. She did not flinch. She did not turn. The sheer, monolithic calm of her response was a wall against which his aggression splashed and dissipated. It was infuriating. He was used to reactions. He was used to people, men and women alike, shrinking under the weight of his presence. This woman absorbed it like a sponge, leaving him with nothing. His eyes fell to the rifle on the cradle. "What is that thing?" he demanded, gesturing with his chin. "Some kind of science fair project?" More laughter from his team. "You know, we have rules about personal weapons on a live fire range, especially ones that look like they're about to fall apart." "It is not a personal weapon," the woman stated simply. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same emotional temperature as a weather report. "It is a prototype, and it is perfectly stable." Thorne let out a short, derisive laugh. "A prototype?" "Right. Look, whatever it is, you can't have it here. It's a liability. My men are working with live munitions, and I can't have some hobbyist's toy going off and causing an incident. So why don't you be a good girl, pack up your little project, and go find the right office to file your paperwork in?" He had deployed the full arsenal of his condescension. The belittling language, the dismissal of her equipment, the infantilizing good girl. It was a tried-and-true method for asserting dominance, for putting civilians in their place. The woman's expression did not change by so much as a flicker of an eyelid. She was a statue of composure. "This weapon system is scheduled for preliminary telemetry testing on this range at 1400 hours. My presence, and its, is authorized by the base commander." The mention of the base commander gave Thorne a moment's pause, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. The colonel was a REMF, a rear echelon paper pusher. He probably signed 100 authorizations a day without reading them. "I'm the senior NCO on this range," Thorne spat, his voice losing its mocking tone and taking on a harder, more threatening edge. "And I'm the range safety officer. What I say here is law, and I say that thing is a hazard. My team thinks so too." He glanced back at his men, who nodded in grim agreement. "Your assessment is noted," the woman said, her voice still unnervingly flat. "And it is incorrect." That was it. The final straw. The quiet, calm, and complete dismissal of his authority, of his expertise, of his very identity as a warrior and a leader. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through Thorne. It was a primal, territorial anger. This was his ground, his sanctuary. And this gray, anonymous woman was defiling it with her presence and her insolence. "All right, that's enough," he snarled. "We're done talking." He nodded to two of his men, a silent command that was instantly understood. "Peterson, Mac, secure that weapon. We'll keep it in our armory until this individual can produce the proper authorization from someone who actually knows what the hell they're talking about." Peterson and Mac moved forward, their movements fluid and practiced. They were large men, mountains of muscle and gear, and they loomed over the woman and the small cradle. They expected her to protest, to shout, to try and physically stop them. They were prepared for a struggle, for tears, for a panicked appeal to authority. They were prepared for anything except what she did. She did nothing. She simply stood there, a pillar of tranquility in the eye of a manufactured hurricane. She watched as Peterson's hand, a slab of meat in a tactical glove, reached for the rifle's frame. It was the posture of a lioness, allowing a jackal to dance at the edge of its kill radius, an expression of such profound and certain superiority that it was, in itself, a form of aggression. Her stillness was more intimidating than any threat could ever be. It was the calm of the abyss, the silence of deep space. It was the absolute certainty that what was about to happen was not her problem, but theirs. And in that moment, for the first time, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced the thick hide of Marcus Thorne's arrogance. He ignored it. It was a mistake he would spend the rest of his life learning to regret. Just as Peterson's fingers were about to brush against the cold metal of the weapon, a new sound cut through the rhythmic din of the range. It was not the familiar crack of a rifle or the boom of a breaching charge. It was a high-pitched, rapidly escalating whine, a sound that drilled directly into the primal centers of the brain and screamed wrong. Every head on the range snapped towards the source, a heavy, shielded container at the far end of the firing line, where another team had been testing a new generation of smart targeting munitions. A single red light, previously a steady pulse, was now flashing with frantic, epileptic speed. The whine grew louder, higher, a dentist's drill boring into the world's last nerve. "What the hell is that?" Mac barked, snatching his hand back from the rifle as if it were red hot. Thorne's blood ran cold. He knew that container. It housed the Pathfinder system, an experimental seeker grenade network. The briefing had been full of warnings: unstable power core, volatile fuel cells, prone to cascading failure. He had dismissed it as the usual hand-wringing from engineers who had never seen a real firefight. Now that whine was the sound of his own hubris coming back to haunt him. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" he roared, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "Everyone back to the blast doors! Now!" His men, disciplined even in their fear, began to move. But it was disorganized, a scramble rather than a retreat. The whine was still climbing, reaching a pitch that was almost unbearable, making their teeth ache. A wisp of acrid, ozone-smelling smoke curled from a vent on the side of the container. The red light was no longer flashing. It was a solid, screaming crimson. "Sir, the core temperature is critical!" a young technician shrieked, his face pale as he stared at a ruggedized laptop connected to the unit. "It's going into thermal runaway. The whole container is going to cook off." Panic blossomed into full-blown terror. Cooking off was a gentle euphemism. The Pathfinder system was linked directly to the range's primary ammunition storage. If that container went, it would start a chain reaction that would not just level the range, it would vaporize a significant portion of the entire forward operating base. The blast doors they were running for would be as effective as tissue paper. They were all standing in the blast chamber of a bomb of their own making. Thorne's mind raced, cycling through emergency protocols, contingency plans, but nothing applied. This was a new kind of failure, a technological demon for which their old exorcisms were useless. He was a master of controlled violence, but this was chaos, pure and elemental, and he had no answer for it. He was shouting orders that had no meaning, his authority dissolving in the face of a problem he could not punch, shoot, or intimidate into submission. Then, through the chaos, a new vector of motion appeared. It was the woman. While everyone else was moving away from the screaming container, she was moving towards it. She did not run. She moved with a liquid, terrifying grace, her steps economical and perfectly placed. It was a predator's gait, a flow of controlled energy that made the frantic scrambling of the seals look clumsy and amateurish. She seemed to glide over the concrete floor, her gray fatigues a blur against the backdrop of panicked motion. In her hands, she now held the strange, skeletal rifle from the cradle. She had picked it up with a speed that no one had even registered. "Get back!" Thorne yelled at her, his voice hoarse with fear and adrenaline. "That thing is going to blow!" She ignored him as if he were a barking dog. Her focus was absolute, her pale blue eyes locked on the failing unit. As she moved, she began to speak, but not to anyone in the room. Her voice was calm, clinical, and utterly incomprehensible. "Initiate diagnostic protocol NIX-7 Alpha. Slave system to external controller. Acknowledge." She was talking to the rifle. A soft blue light emanated from a small panel near the rifle's trigger guard. A synthesized, perfectly calm female voice, an echo of her own, responded from a tiny speaker in the stock. "Acknowledged. Protocol NIX-7 Alpha initiated. System slaved. Awaiting command." The woman reached the edge of the mandatory safety perimeter, a thick yellow line painted on the floor that everyone else was desperately trying to get behind. She stopped, braced herself, and shouldered the rifle. It seemed to become an extension of her body, settling into her shoulder with a practiced familiarity that spoke of thousands of hours of training. She was no longer an anonymous technician. She was a weapon, fused with the strange device in her hands. "Isolate the primary power conduit," she commanded, her eye now pressed to a complex optical sight. "Project targeting solution for the primary coolant regulator valve. Sub-millimeter precision required." "Targeting solution acquired," the rifle's voice replied instantly. "Regulator valve casing is 12 millimeters of hardened composite. Probability of single-shot penetration, 98.7%. Thorne stared, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. She was aiming at the container. She was going to shoot the device that was about to explode. It was the single most insane thing he had ever witnessed. "Are you crazy?" he screamed. "You shoot that thing and you'll set it off for sure." The woman spoke, her voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. "Senior Chief, your tactical assessment was incorrect before, and it is incorrect now. You are an expert in kicking down doors. I am an expert in the quantum state physics that power this device. I suggest you defer to the subject matter expert. Now be quiet. You are distracting me." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. The sheer, unadulterated authority in her voice, the cold, irrefutable logic of her statement, silenced him completely. He and his men, the apex predators, were reduced to the status of terrified onlookers. They were children watching a surgeon perform an impossible operation. They could do nothing but stand there, mouths agape, as this quiet gray woman prepared to solve a problem that was seconds away from killing them all. The whining from the container had reached a fever pitch, a sound that felt like the fabric of reality tearing apart. The air crackled with energy. "Executing fire command. Now," she said, her voice a whisper of pure control. There was no thunderous crack, no muzzle flash. There was only a faint, almost musical hum, and a barely visible distortion in the air between the rifle's muzzle and the target. A tiny, incandescent blue line, thinner than a needle, shot across the range. It struck the container not with a clang of impact, but with a quiet hiss. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The whining continued, unabated. Thorne felt a surge of despair, a certainty that they were all dead. Then, with a sudden, violent gasp, the whining sound choked and died. The screaming red light on the container flickered once, twice, and then switched to a steady, healthy green. A plume of supercooled nitrogen vapor vented from a pressure release valve with a loud whoosh, blanketing the area in a thick white fog. Silence descended upon Range 7, a profound, ringing silence that was more shocking than the noise it had replaced. It was the silence of averted annihilation. The woman lowered the rifle, her movements as fluid and precise as ever. She unslung it from her shoulder and held it at a low ready, her posture one of relaxed vigilance. She turned her head and looked directly at Marcus Thorne, her pale blue eyes cutting through the dissipating fog. Her expression was unchanged. It was not triumphant. It was not relieved. It was the look of a professional who had simply completed a task. A task for which failure was not a considerable variable. Before anyone could speak, before the collective shock could even begin to wear off, the heavy blast doors at the far end of the range ground open. The blinding white light of the exterior flooded in, silhouetting a figure. As the man stepped inside, his form became clear. He was tall, lean, and wore the crisp, starched uniform of a full-bird colonel. On his collar, the silver eagle of his rank seemed to gleam in the dim light of the range. It was Colonel Matheson, the base commander, and his face, a mask of grim concern, was etched with deep lines of stress. He was followed by a phalanx of heavily armed military police, their weapons held at the ready. Matheson's eyes swept the scene, taking in the stunned SEALs, the terrified technician by his laptop, the fog-shrouded container with its placid green light, and finally, the quiet woman in gray. The moment his gaze locked onto her, his entire demeanor shifted. The tension drained from his shoulders. The harsh lines on his face softened into an expression of profound, almost reverent relief. He ignored Thorne completely, striding past the senior chief as if he were a piece of furniture. He walked directly toward the woman, his polished boots clicking on the concrete floor, the sound echoing in the cathedral-like silence. He stopped a respectful 5 feet in front of her. He did not speak to her immediately. Instead, his eyes went to the silent container, then to the strange rifle she held. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of deep understanding and appreciation. Then he turned his gaze back to her, drew himself up to his full height, and executed the single sharpest, most respectful salute Marcus Thorne had ever seen in his 20 years of service. It was not the perfunctory gesture an officer gives a subordinate. It was the salute one gives to a legend, to an authority far exceeding the simple matter of rank. "Chief Warrant Officer 5 Reed," Colonel Matheson said, his voice resonating with a deference that was utterly baffling to every other person in the room. "I see you have the situation under control. We were monitoring the energy spike from the command center. We thought we were about to lose the whole damn grid." The name descended into the room like a physical weight. Chief Warrant Officer 5. CW5, the unicorn rank. a mythical beast in the military hierarchy, a technical and tactical expert whose authority on their given subject was considered absolute, often superseding that of a general. They were the keepers of the secret fire, the high priests of the military's most esoteric and lethal arts. And her name? Reed. The technician, the young specialist who had been monitoring the laptop, gasped. His eyes went wide with dawning horror and awe. He whispered the name to himself, like an incantation. Evelyn Reed. The Evelyn Reed. Call sign. Nix. The name, the call sign, hung in the air, charged with meaning. It was a name spoken only in whispers in the highest echelons of special operations and military intelligence. Nix. The Greek goddess of the night, a primordial entity from which all other things were born. She was the lead designer, the chief architect, and the final field implementation authority for the entire Pathfinder program and a dozen other black-budget projects so secret that their very existence was a classified fact. The rifle she held was not a prototype. It was the master controller, the key to the entire system, a tool only she and the entire world knew how to wield. The telemetry test she had mentioned was not a simple data-gathering exercise. It was a final, live-fire diagnostic that only she could perform. She hadn't come to their range to watch them. She had come to their range to work on her system. And they, in their monumental arrogance, had mistaken the architect of the temple for a mere tourist. The 5 Navy SEALs, men who prided themselves on their situational awareness, on their ability to read a room and identify a threat, stood frozen. They felt a new kind of dread creeping up their spines, a cold, sickening realization of the magnitude of their blunder. It was a professional humiliation so profound it bordered on the spiritual. They had not just been wrong. They had been wrong on a scale that was almost incomprehensible. They had threatened, mocked, and attempted to disarm a woman who held more real power in her little finger than all of them combined. She could end their careers with a single, softly spoken word. Marcus Thorne felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. His entire worldview, the carefully constructed edifice of his superiority, had been demolished in the space of 5 minutes. He looked at the woman, at Chief Warrant Officer 5 Evelyn Reed, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He saw the decades of study and sacrifice that were written in the quiet confidence of her posture. He saw the immense, crushing weight of responsibility that she carried with such effortless grace. He saw the mind behind those pale blue eyes, a mind that operated on a level he could not even begin to fathom. He had looked at a goddess and seen only a clerk. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, metallic taste in his mouth. Reed gave the colonel a short, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement between peers that transcended rank. The cascade was initiated by a faulty plasma injector in the primary power cell, Colonel. The stock safety protocols were insufficient to contain it. I had to manually sever the connection by ablating the regulator valve. She patted the rifle. The Mark IV performed within expected parameters. Of course it did, Chief, Matheson said, a faint smile touching his lips. He finally lowered his salute. He then turned, his expression hardening as his eyes fell upon Senior Chief Thorne. The warmth was gone, replaced by a glacial fury. Senior Chief, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I have a dozen reports on my desk from the last hour. Reports of a critical equipment failure. Reports of an imminent catastrophic detonation. And a very, very strange report from the range tower that my senior enlisted DevGru liaison was attempting to confiscate a piece of classified hardware from the one person on this continent who could keep us all from being turned into a cloud of ionized gas. Tell me, Thorn, is there any part of that last report that you believe to be inaccurate? Thorn felt his throat constrict. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? He could not lie. He could not make excuses. His arrogance had been laid bare for all to see. He had failed as a leader, as a safety officer, and as a professional. He had been so blinded by his own prejudice, by the woman's unassuming appearance, that he had nearly instigated a disaster. He finally found his voice, a dry, rasping thing that sounded alien to his own ears. No, Colonel. The report is accurate. The Colonel's eyes were chips of ice. I see. You and your team will report to my office at 0600 tomorrow for a formal inquiry. You will be confined to quarters until then. Your evaluation mission is suspended indefinitely. Is that understood? Yes, Colonel, Thorn croaked, the words tasting like ash. But then a quiet voice interrupted. That won't be necessary, Colonel. Every head turned back to Evelyn Reed. She had stepped forward, her expression still unreadable, still placid. A formal inquiry will generate a paper trail, she said, her tone clinical and pragmatic. A paper trail will draw unwanted attention from oversight committees. This program operates best in the shadows. A public reprimand for one of the Navy's most decorated senior chiefs would create ripples I'd rather avoid. The Colonel looked at her, his expression softening again. He deferred to her instantly. As you wish, Chief, but this gross dereliction of professional conduct cannot go unanswered. It won't, Reed assured him. She then turned her full attention to Marcus Thorn. Her pale blue eyes bored into his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something behind the calm facade. It wasn't anger. It was something far more terrifying, disappointment. It was the look of a master craftsman examining a flawed tool. Senior Chief Thorn, she began, her voice low and precise, each word a carefully placed stone. Your failure today was not one of courage or of discipline. It was a failure of perception. You looked at me and saw a woman, so you assumed weakness. You saw civilian attire, so you assumed ignorance. You saw a piece of unfamiliar technology, so you assumed it was a toy. These assumptions, this failure to observe and analyze the actual data in front of you, is more than just a personal failing. In our line of work, it is a tactical liability that gets people killed. She took a step closer. Thorn could not move. He was pinned by her gaze. You and your men are warriors, she continued. You are the sharp end of the spear. But the spear is nothing without the science that forged the tip, the intelligence that guides its flight, and the quiet professionals who ensure it functions as designed. You dismissed me because I did not fit your narrow, outdated archetype of what a warrior looks like. You believe strength is loud. You believe authority must be physically imposing. You are wrong. True strength is quiet competence. True authority is the simple, undeniable fact of being the best at what you do. Let your actions be your argument. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the silent room. Thorn felt them brand themselves onto his soul. Colonel Matheson is correct, she said finally. This cannot go unanswered, but a court-martial would be a waste of a valuable asset. Your combat record is exemplary, Senior Chief. You are a good trigger puller, but you are a poor student of the modern battlefield, so your education will begin. Effective immediately, you and your team are reassigned. Your new duty station is with me. You will be my personal security and logistics detail for the remainder of my deployment. A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the other 4 SEALs. Thorne's mind reeled. Security detail for a civilian-looking technician. It was the ultimate humiliation. It was bodyguard duty. It was carrying her bags. Reed seemed to read his thoughts. "Oh, you will do more than just carry my gear, Senior Chief," she said, a ghost of a smile, cold and sharp as a razor, touching her lips for the first time. "You will observe. You will learn. You will watch me and my team disassemble and reassemble technologies you cannot even conceive of. You will sit in on threat briefings that will make your blood run cold. You will see the real war, the one fought in laboratories and server rooms and quiet, dark corners of the world. You will learn that the man or woman with the rifle is only the final link in a very long and complex chain. You will learn humility. You will learn respect. This is not a punishment. It is a curriculum. And I will be your instructor. Class begins tomorrow at 0500. Do not be late." With that, she turned her back on him, a gesture of complete and final dismissal. She walked back to her maintenance cradle, placed the rifle gently upon it, and began to run a post-action diagnostic. Her attention already a million miles away, back in the world of physics and engineering. The confrontation was over. The lesson had been delivered. The story of what happened on Range 7 that day passed into the institutional lore of the special operations community. It became a modern fable, a cautionary tale told to new operators in the smoke-filled bars of Virginia Beach and the dusty brewhouses of Coronado. The details, as they always do, grew with each telling. The 5 SEALs became 10. The rifle shot a beam of pure lightning. The woman, Nix, disappeared in a cloud of smoke. But the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained unchanged. It was a story about the danger of assumptions, about the quiet, unassuming nature of true mastery. Marcus Thorne did not go to the colonel's office the next morning. At 0445, he and his 4 men stood in full kit outside the sterile, windowless building that housed the base's Advanced Projects Division. They stood in silence, their faces grim, their arrogance stripped away, leaving only a raw, chastened humility. At precisely 0500, the door hissed open, and Chief Warrant Officer 5 Evelyn Reed stepped out. She was dressed in the same simple gray fatigues. She carried a small, heavy-looking case. She did not greet them. She simply looked at Thorne and said, "My primary toolkit. Keep it with me at all times." Thorne took the case from her. Its weight was substantial. He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." For the next 6 months, Thorne and his team lived in her world. They followed her from secure labs to black site airfields. They watched her brief 4-star generals with the same unnerving calm she had shown on the range. They saw her argue with physicists over quantum entanglement on a secure video link, and then, an hour later, demonstrate a new close-quarters combat technique to a group of Tier 1 operators that was so brutally efficient, it left them speechless. She was a polymath, a warrior scholar of a type they had never imagined existed. They learned that her rifle, the Mark IV, did not fire bullets. It fired a hypervelocity focused particle beam that could be tuned to disrupt electronics, ablate armor, or, at its highest setting, pass through a target with so little kinetic energy transfer that it would cauterize the wound channel instantly, leaving a perfectly dead but outwardly unharmed enemy. It was a ghost weapon. She was a ghost warrior. They learned humility. They learned to see beyond the uniform, beyond the gender, beyond the surface of things. They learned that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one who is listening the most and speaking the least. Thorne, in particular, was transformed. The loud, boastful senior chief who had walked onto Range 7 died that day. In his place, a new man was forged in the crucible of his own humiliation. He became quiet, observant, and thoughtful. He learned to ask questions instead of making declarations. He learned to respect expertise in all its forms. Years later, Master Chief Marcus Thorne stood on the grinding sands of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, addressing a new class of SEAL candidates. The sun beat down on them, just as it had at FOB Archer. But Thorne's demeanor was different. He was no longer a swaggering king. He was a quiet, respected teacher, his face carved with the wisdom of hard-earned lessons. "You are all strong," he told the young, eager faces before him. "You are all brave. You are the physical peak of what this nation can produce, but that is not enough. Your strength will mean nothing if your mind is weak. Your courage will be useless if your eyes are closed." He paused, letting them absorb the weight of his words. "I'm going to tell you a story," he said, his voice dropping. "A story about the most dangerous person I ever met. It wasn't a 7-foot-tall enemy fighter. It wasn't a bomb maker or a terrorist leader. It was a 5'5" woman with pale blue eyes and a quiet voice. And I made the mistake of judging her by what I saw instead of what she was." He told them the story. He did not spare himself. He detailed his own arrogance, his condescension, his catastrophic failure of judgment, with brutal, unflinching honesty. He told them about Chief Warrant Officer 5 Evelyn Reed, about Nix, and about the day he learned that the true measure of a warrior is not the volume of their voice, but the depth of their competence. He used his own shame as a teaching tool, a shield to protect these new warriors from the hubris that had almost destroyed him. The lesson, the explicit moral of this modern military fable, is one that echoes far beyond the confines of a firing range or a battlefield. It is a universal truth. Do not mistake silence for weakness. Do not mistake a lack of ornamentation for a lack of substance. In a world that is increasingly loud, filled with posturing and self-promotion, true strength, true authority, and true mastery are often found in the quietest corners, in the unassuming individuals who let their actions serve as their only necessary argument. They are the architects of the world, the quiet professionals who keep the machine running. They do not seek recognition, and they do not need your approval. But you would be wise, very wise indeed, to get out of their way when they go to work, for their competence is a force of nature, and to stand against it armed only with your own assumptions is to be as a fool arguing with a hurricane. You will not win. You will only be taught a lesson, and if you are lucky, you will survive the education.